Gentlemen of the jury, you are the judges of the evidence to be laid before you. Be just and fear not, for the true administration of justice is the foundation of good government.
Famous jury trials, dramatizations of cases taken from actual court history. The names of persons and places have been altered to protect the identity of those concerned.
The state versus John Dudley.
When the National Prohibition Amendment became the law of the land in America, there began the fantastic era of the Roaring Twenties, when hoodlums, gamblers, and racketeers rose to positions of unbelievable wealth and power on the twin swelling tides of bootleg liquor and national prosperity. At the decade's beginning, a struggling young lawyer named John Dudley began his career defending the men who lived in this strange half-world. Within a few years, he became one of the most sensationally successful criminal lawyers of his day. And then, at the height of his career, he was indicted for bribing a juror in order to win a case. Now we bring you the trial of John Dudley, in which he acted as his own defense attorney, the most clever, the most noted criminal lawyer of his time, defending himself in the most bitter legal fight of his career. We commence tonight's famous jury trial,
The state versus John Dudley.
The courtroom in the Midwestern town where the trial was held was crowded with well-known figures from the underworld and the social register, and throngs of the curious who had come to see the dramatic struggle of a great criminal lawyer fighting to save himself from prison and personal ruin. A tense hush fell over the courtroom as the trial got underway, and the district attorney began his opening address to the jury.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the case that we will present to you is serious enough in its implications in the attempt of the defendant, John Dudley, to undermine the very foundation of our legal system and make a mockery of justice.
Objection! That is the very point the district attorney must prove. And he's just stated it as a fact. Your Honor, I move for a withdrawal of a juror and...
I sustain your objection, Mr. Dudley, but I will not entertain a motion for a mistrial at this point. Proceed, Mr. Black.
But, Your Honor, you can't refuse to hear any motion, and my reasons for it.
I can and do refuse.
But, Your Honor...
No arguments, please.
Exception.
Go ahead, Mr. Black. As I say, we will prove to you that a most serious crime has been committed. But the facts of this case are very simple. We will show that John Dudley gave a bribe of $500 to a man named John Brewster, who has been chosen to serve on a jury which was to hear a case in which Dudley was the lawyer for the defense. For that sum, John Brewster was to vote for the acquittal of Dudley's client. John Brewster has already been tried for receiving that bribe, and he was convicted. And when John Brewster was convicted of receiving the bribe, Dudley, knowing that it would be his turn to be tried next, disappeared, went into hiding, and was only recently apprehended by the police. That is the record of events that has led up to the defendants being brought to trial before you, and the state will prove it step by step. Call for Tom Bryant. Tom Bryant. Tom Bryant.
Tom Bryant, take the stand, please. Do you solemnly swear that the evidence you shall give in this trial will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Mr. Bryant, what was your occupation up to 3 months ago?
I worked for Mr. Dudley.
The defendant, John Dudley?
Yes, sir. I was sort of confidential messenger, go-between, private dick. I did the dirty work for Mr. Dudley. I object to all of that answer, and particularly to the expression dirty work.
I overrule the objection.
I move for a mistrial on the grounds that Your Honor's erroneous ruling prejudiced my case with the jury.
My ruling did nothing of the sort. Objection overruled.
I renew my objection for a mistrial on the ground that Your Honor is openly prejudiced against me and is taking no trouble to conceal it from the jury.
How dare you say that? I overrule your objections, and I will hear no more motions on that point.
I again move for a mistrial on the grounds that I am being denied a fair trial in not being allowed to make proper motions and arguments.
Overruled, and I want no more of this. Proceed, Mr. Bragg.
Exception.
Mr. Bryant, you did confidential work for Mr. Dudley.
Yeah.
Do you remember any confidential assignment you did for the defendant on September 12th last?
Yes, sir. Johnny writes out a check for $500, and I take it down to Forinsky, the cigar counter fellow what's in the same building, and I cash it for him.
Oh, Ferensky kept that much money in his register?
Oh, yeah, he was a bookie.
I see. Now, what were you to do with the money?
I was to put it in an envelope for a guy named Brewster and leave it with Forinsky.
Did you do this?
Yeah, but there was a hitch, though. Forinsky wouldn't cash a check for that much dough without it was certified. So I ran up to the bank and had it certified. And then I came back to Forinsky and he cashed it. And I put the dough in an envelope for Mr. Brewster.
You didn't cash the check at the bank?
No, you see, it was made out to Forinsky.
I see. Well, that's all. Cross-examine, Mr. Dudley.
Mr. Bryant, you stated that you were in my employ. Will you tell the jury what your occupation was prior to that?
I was a boxer.
And how long had it been since you'd had a match before I hired you?
Oh, about 2 years.
How did you live during those 2 years?
Jobs.
Didn't you live by touching your friends for what you could get out of them? Didn't you end up begging in the street?
Your Honor, I object. All this is irrelevant and immaterial.
The character of this witness is entirely relevant and material to this testimony.
Objection overruled.
Answer the question.
I was down on my luck a couple of times, sure.
Didn't you meet me the first time when you asked me for a nickel for a cup of coffee? And I said, you don't need coffee. You need a drink. And didn't I take you to a speakeasy where you told me your whole story? And you said, I'm a no-good drunk. And didn't I say, oh, you've just had a run of hard luck. Come around and see me in the morning. I'll find you something to do.
Yeah, Johnny, you was swell.
I was swell, huh? Now, suppose you tell the jury how you happened to leave my employ, huh? Well? Didn't I fire you for stealing money? Tom, didn't I let you get away with it so long as the checks were for $5 or $10?
Well, boss.
And didn't I warn you when you began making bigger checks, and didn't I fire you when you kept on doing it?
You can't prove that, boss.
I don't have to prove it. We both know it's true, and you don't dare deny it to my face. Now then, after I fired you, weren't you picked up by the district attorney's office and offered money to tell what you knew about me?
Your Honor, this is outrageous. I object to this insinuation against me and my office.
There is nothing improper about the question, Your Honor. I am asking the witness for information.
You can't ask for information by making an unsupported charge against opposing counsel, Mr. Dudley. Objection sustained.
Did you, talk to the district attorney?
Yeah.
And, when you were not able to give him any information he could use against me, didn't he offer you a job for life if you would swear in court to any story he told you to tell?
Your Honor! Your Honor! Your Honor, I am being accused of suborning a witness. I ask that the question be stricken out, and I demand an apology from counsel.
The question is a perfectly proper one.
It is not a proper question. It presupposes an answer, not an evidence.
The testimony of the witness would be the best evidence.
All right, boss, I'll give it to you. The answer's no.
Your Honor! All right. No more questions.
Call Joe Ferensky.
Joe Forinsky. Joe Forinsky. Joe Forinsky.
Joe Ferensky, proprietor of the cigar stand, testified that he had cashed Dudley's check for $500 and had seen Tom Bryan put it in an envelope for John Brewster. That Brewster had come in half an hour later and had been given the envelope. Then Dudley began his cross-examination.
Joe, do you take bets as your cigar counter?
Objection. Irrelevant and immaterial.
Sustained.
Your Honor, the defendant's business has a vital bearing on his testimony.
I have ruled on the motion. You can have your exception.
Then I accept. Kerensky, didn't you once engage my services to appeal on a conviction for betting on the horse races?
Yes, I do that. And you take my money and you lose the kite.
I did the best I could for you, Joe. You can't win all the time, you know. Now, who asked you to testify in this case?
Mr. Black.
The district attorney over there.
Say.
Now, Joe, didn't he tell you that he would put you out of business if you didn't testify against me?
No!
Your Honor, I object to these scandalous attempts to smear me in the eyes of the jury. I've had enough of this sort of thing.
So have I, but let it stand. He has answered.
Kerensky, didn't you tell your friends that the district attorney had threatened to close you up unless you testified the way he wanted you to in this trial? And didn't you say that the testimony he wanted you to give was a lie?
Objection! Objection! Objection, Your Honor! I object!
Mr. Dudley, I want you to understand you can't do these things. No honest man would resort to such tactics.
I accept to the court's comment and demand a withdrawal of a juror and a mistrial.
You can make a joke out of this court.
There are lots of things about this case that are a joke, but it's no joke to me. In view of your remarks about making a joke of this case, I again move for a mistrial.
You can't have a mistrial. You can't run this court. Motion denied. All your motions denied. Now continue with the cross-examination, and for heaven's sake, do it properly.
Cross-examination? No more questions, Joe.
Order! Order in this court!
These fantastic scenes continued, with John Dudley making every effort to discredit the witnesses against him and win an acquittal for himself. We will continue with the trial in just a moment. Now we continue with the trial of John Dudley. The prosecution introduced into evidence Dudley's certified check for $500. And then the star witness was called, the man already convicted of receiving a bribe from Dudley, the juror John Brewster.
Mr. Brewster, you served on the jury in the Edward Miller case.
Yeah, I did.
The defendant was defense lawyer in that case?
Yep.
Had you known him before that time?
No, I'd never seen him before in my life.
Did you meet him after you were selected as a juror in the Miller trial?
Yeah. The night after I was impaneled, I got a telephone call. I answered, and the voice said, "This is Dudley. Would you like to make some money?" I said I would. And he said, "Can you meet me in an hour at the Circle Casino?" And I said I would.
What did you do then?
I went out to the casino. Mr. Dudley hadn't arrived yet. I waited for about half an hour, and then he came in the front door.
What did you do?
Well, I was standing in the foyer hall. He turned round and shook hands with me, and he said, "How are you?" And I said, "All right." And then he said, "Miller's a fine fellow, and I want you to do what you can for him."
And what happened then?
Well, he told me he'd get in touch with me again, and there'd be $500 in it for me if I played square with him. And I said I would.
Now then, did you receive that money?
Yep.
Now, Mr. Brewster, did the defendant tell you why you were being given this money?
Yeah, he said I was to vote for acquittal in the Miller case.
I see. Well, that's all. Your witness?
Mr. Brewster, on September 9th, when you say I telephoned you, you had never seen me before?
No.
Or heard my voice?
No.
And when I came into the Circle Casino, you were waiting in the hall.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Oh, by the way, Mr. Brewster, how did you recognize me?
What?
Didn't you just testify that you'd never seen me before in your life?
Well, I...
Didn't you just say that?
Yeah, but I did know who you were. I'd seen a photograph of you. I recognized you from that. And I'd seen you in the courtroom, too.
But, Mr. Brewster, I wasn't in the courtroom when you were chosen as a juror. My assistant was there that day.
It was, it was your picture then. I knew you all right.
Mr. Brewster, you are serving a prison term now.
Yeah.
Convicted of what?
For taking your bribe.
Anything else?
Well, yes.
What?
Perjury.
Perjury. That's all, Mr. Brewster.
Your Honor, the state rests.
The defense will open to the jury.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, by this time the nature of the district attorney's case should be fairly clear to you. You undoubtedly see the picture very clearly, including the frame. I will show you that every one of those witnesses against me was a tool of the district attorney's office. Then I will take the stand myself and tell you why I'm being framed. I call as my first witness Mr. Roger Black, the Honorable District Attorney himself.
This is preposterous. You can't call me.
Certainly I can call you. Of course, you can refuse to take the stand if you don't want to testify under oath.
Are you insinuating I'm afraid to testify?
If you're not, why don't you take the stand?
You can't put me in a position like this. It's unheard of. I refuse to testify.
That's just as good, Mr. Black. Okay. Call Maury Scully.
Maury Scully. Maury Scully.
Now, Miss Scully, what's your occupation?
I'm your secretary, Mr. Dudley.
Uh-huh. You remember last September 12th?
Yes.
You remember the circumstances under which I wrote out a check for $500 that day?
Yes, a friend of yours, Joe Cohen, came in and said he needed some money right away. Would you pay him the $300 you owed him?
And what did I do?
You said you'd get him the money right away.
Yeah.
You had me type out a check for $500.
Uh-huh.
After you signed it, you gave it to Tom Bryant and told him to go downstairs to Joe Ferensky and have him cash it.
And did Bryant get the money?
Yes. And you gave Mr. Cohen the money he wanted and put the rest in your office safe. I saw you do it.
I see. Thanks, Maury. That's all. Your witness.
Miss Scully, how long have you worked for the defendant?
5 years?
You're fond of him?
Certainly.
Devoted to his interests?
Yes.
Would you do anything for him?
Anything within reason.
Anything within reason. Well, that's all, Miss Scully.
Call Johnny Olson.
Johnny Olson. Johnny Olson. Johnny Olson.
The next witness told of the conversation he had with Joe Ferensky, the bookie, in which Ferensky told him he was being forced to testify against Dudley under the threat of being arrested, and that Ferensky had said the story he was told to tell on the stand was untrue. The district attorney then showed that this witness was a close friend of Dudley's. Then the defendant addressed the court.
Your Honor, I now wish to turn over my defense to my colleague here, Mr. Waters.
Very well. Thank you, Your Honor. John Dudley. John Dudley. John Dudley.
Take this stand, please. You solemnly swear the evidence you shall give in this trial will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Now, Mr. Dudley, did you give a bribe of $500 or any other amount to John Brewster?
No, never.
Will you tell the jury of any conversation bearing on this case that you had with the district attorney before you were accused of giving this bribe?
Yes, it was about a week before the Miller trial began. Mr. Black, the district attorney, called me into his office and asked me if I'd help him. I asked him what he meant, and he told me.
John, you will be a great public servant to this community as you wanted to be.
Dudley's a friend of the people, huh? Now, look, what's behind this, Roger? It isn't because you've been losing too many cases recently by any chance, is it?
I mean, I'm offering you a chance to get on the right side of society or get out of the law game.
Would be awfully convenient for you if I got out, wouldn't it, Roger?
I have a public duty to the people who voted for me, and I'm going to try to do it.
Sorry, Roger, it's no soap. I'm going to take the Miller case.
Then I'll get your neck, John.
That's interesting. How?
Your record is pretty shady. I think maybe I can dig up something against you and make it stick.
Well, it's been tried, didn't work.
Then I'll find something that will.
Mr. Dudley, do you mean to say the DA actually threatened to frame you if you defended Edward Miller?
That's right. I meant to say it, and I do say it. The district attorney threatened me.
That's all, thank you. Your witness, Mr. Black.
One question, Mr. Dudley. Was anyone present at this, shall we say, fanciful interview?
Well, of course not. You're not fool enough to call in witnesses.
Your Honor.
Strike out everything after, of course not.
That's all.
Your Honor, the defense rests.
The state also rests.
Your Honor, I move for a dismissal of the indictment on the grounds...
Motion denied.
Your Honor, you haven't even heard my argument.
I don't want to hear your argument. Come up to the jury, please.
Exception. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the case against me is a conspiracy. It's a frame-up. Look at the witnesses against me. A man whom I fired for forging checks in my name, a punch-drunk rummy who'd cut his own throat for a glass of denatured alcohol. And then there was Ferensky, the bookie, a man at the mercy of the district attorney who can padlock his place and ruin him at a moment's notice. Ferensky's place has not been padlocked. When you leave this courtroom, any one of you can go down there and make a bet on the horses. Now, you can't believe this perjured testimony. And who's the other witness? John Brewster, who swore to you that I gave him a bribe. Why did this confessed and convicted perjurer tell this story? Well, there's only one possible answer. The district attorney has the evidence of a much more serious crime committed by John Brewster, and he agreed not to prosecute Brewster for this crime if Brewster would confess to accepting a bribe. There is the district attorney's whole case. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not only fighting for my freedom here, I'm fighting for the profession that I love, my work, my professional reputation, my self-respect. I have had a fantastically successful career, and it would be ironic indeed if people should say of me in the words of the Pharisees of old, he saved others, himself he cannot save. But I have never gone down on my knees and begged the jury for a verdict of acquittal, and I'd scorn to do it now. I would not seek to change your verdict in violation of your consciences. I can only tell you as honestly and sincerely and as earnestly as I can that I am innocent.
The prosecution will sum up.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have been listening to one of the cleverest and most successful lawyers of today. Be well assured that everything he said to you was thought out and weighed for its emotional appeal to you, and that such moving sincerity was obviously part of the defendant's witnesses. Now, I am no courtroom actor. I must rely on evidence and not on appeals to your emotions. And the evidence, ladies and gentlemen, is conclusive. 3 witnesses have testified to actually seeing the bribe given by the defendant to John Brewster. The defendant complains that my witnesses are low characters. The defendant is known as a lawyer for the underworld, and so that is where I have to go to find his acquaintances. Ladies and gentlemen, our courts of law are the most precious heritage from the past, where the guilty are brought to punishment for their crimes, and to which the humblest citizen can turn for redress of his wrong and win justice from even those privileged and powerful. If our courts are undermined and corrupted, the liberty and the safeguards of the whole people will be threatened with extinction. It is the duty of every citizen to guard our courts from any threat as jealously as he would guard his country by force of arms in time of war. The defendant in this case has sought to corrupt the court, to set justice at naught, and to turn a criminal loose upon society. There is no greater crime than that, ladies and gentlemen. Your judgment can only be guilty as charged.
The jury retired to consider its verdict, and the courtroom crowd dispersed, moved by the words of the district attorney, knowing that he had spoken profound truths. But there were many who wondered if he'd used them against the right man, if John Dudley might not, after all, be innocent. We will bring you the verdict in just a moment. And now we take you back to the courtroom where the jury was ready to deliver its verdict.
Mr. Foreman, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor.
And how do you find?
We find the defendant, John Dudley, not Guilty.
Acquitted, John Dudley went back to the career he loved, but died a few years later at the height of his powers. It was by then firmly realized that he'd been innocent of the charges against him. But the truth of the district attorney's part in the affair was never proved. Famous jury trials, the drama of the courts drawn from actual courtroom cases. This is a Grace Gibson radio production.